Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel where we unravel the myths you thought you knew. Today, we're diving back into Greek mythology, but with a twist. We've all heard the epic tales of the Titanomachy, the colossal war between the gods and titans. It's usually painted as a cataclysmic, world-shattering conflict filled with lightning bolts, earth-shaking battles, and non-stop action. But what if I told you the reality was, well, a bit more relaxed? Let us peel back the layers of legend and explore the Great War that was less of a bang and more of a long, drawn-out yawn. So, where did we leave off? Ah, yes, the young god Zeus, raised in secret on the island of Crete, hidden away from his father, Cronus, the Titan king who had a rather unhealthy habit of swallowing his children. Zeus grew up strong, clever, and fueled by a singular purpose to overthrow his tyrannical father and free his siblings from their gastric prison. The stage was set for a dramatic, explosive confrontation. The son returning to claim his birthright. The father, a paranoid king clinging to power. It has all the makings of a blockbuster. But here's where our story takes a slightly different path. The popular version involves Zeus tricking Cronus into drinking a special potion, causing him to regurgitate his divine offspring. It's a dramatic and frankly quite gross moment. But let's imagine this with the lethargic grace of eternal beings. Zeus didn't just storm the gates of Mount Athos, the Titan's stronghold. No, this was a more strategic and, dare I say, leisurely affair. Think of it less as a frontal assault and more like a very, very slow-motion heist. Zeus, with the help of his mother Rhea and the Titaness Metis, renowned for her wisdom, concocted the plan. It wasn't about a sudden Shukando campaign. It was about patience. They had all of eternity, after all. What's the rush? Zeus, disguised, probably served as Cronus' cupbearer for a while. Picture it. Zeus, pouring nectar, making small talk about the weather, all while casually plotting the downfall of the supreme ruler of the cosmos. The tension must have been palpable, but stretched over decades. It probably just felt like a slightly awkward family dinner that never ended. When the moment finally came, and Cronus drank the amethyst mixture, the great regurgitation wasn't a violent explosion. It was more like a long, groggy sigh. Out they tumbled, one by one. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. They weren't battle-hardened warriors emerging with swords drawn. They were dazed, confused, and probably in need of a good stretch after being cooped up inside their father for who knows how long. Imagine being stuck in a dark, cramped space for centuries. Your first instinct isn't to fight a war. It's to blink in the sunlight and ask, what year is it? So, Zeus has his siblings back. The team is assembled. This is where the Titanomachy, the Great War, officially begins. The history books and epic poems tell us it was a 10-year war that shook the foundations of the universe, and it did last 10 years. But let's reconsider the pacing. A 10-year war for mortals is an eternity of suffering and constant battle. For immortal gods and titans, it's more like a particularly long and drawn-out chess match. With mountains, the Olympians, led by Zeus, established their base on Mount Olympus. The Titans, under Cronus, held their ground on Mount Othrys. The battlefield was the plains of Thessaly between them. Now, instead of imagining constant, frenzied combat, picture this: long periods of inactivity, days, maybe weeks, would go by with nothing happening. The gods would lounge on their cloudy thrones, sipping ambrosia, perhaps debating the optimal trajectory for throwing a boulder. The Titans would do much the same. Maybe engaging in some thoughtful navel-gazing or taking a nap. Every so often, someone would get a burst of energy. A Titan like Atlas might decide, "You know what? I think I'll hurl that mountain peak over there." He'd spend the better part of a day meticulously choosing the right peak, getting a good grip, and then, with a great, unhurried heave, send it sailing across the sky. The gods on Olympus would see it coming from miles away. "Oh, look," Poseidon might say. "Atlas is throwing things again. Should we do something?" Zeus, ever the strategist, would calmly reply, "Let's see where it lands first." The battles weren't chaotic. They were a series of considered, almost ponderous exchanges. A god would unleash a carefully aimed lightning bolt. A titan would respond by lazily shifting a tectonic plate, causing a minor, localized earthquake. There were long pauses for strategic thinking, occasional stretches, and probably frequent breaks for snacks. The earth-shattering roars described in the poems might have just been a particularly loud yawn from a sleepy titan echoing through the valleys. This went on for a decade. 10 years of thoughtful boulder throwing, tactical napping, and very slow advances. It was a war of attrition, but the attrition was mainly against boredom. The younger gods had a bit more pep in their step, but the older titans were set in their ways. They'd ruled the cosmos for eons. The idea of rushing anything was utterly foreign to them. Their philosophy was, why do today what can be put off for a century? Zeus realized that this stalemate could quite literally last forever. He needed an edge, a game following a prophecy from Gaia, Mother Earth herself, who was probably getting a bit tired of all the noise messing up her continent. Zeus descended into the depths of Tartarus. This is the deepest, darkest pit of the underworld, a place of punishment and confinement. And who was imprisoned there? The Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires. The 100. They were the other children of Uranus and Gaia, Cronus' own brothers, whom he had left imprisoned out of fear of their immense power. Freeing them wasn't a simple jailbreak. It was a negotiation. Zeus, ever the diplomat, promised them freedom and a place of honor in the new world order if they would join his cause. The Cyclopes, master craftsmen, were overjoyed. As a thank you, they forged incredible weapons for the gods. For Zeus, They crafted the Thunderbolt, a weapon that could harness the raw power of the sky. For Poseidon, they made the Trident, giving him command over the seas and earthquakes. And for Hades, they created the Helm of Darkness, which could render the wearer invisible. And then there were the three giants, each with 50 heads and 100 powerful arms. When they joined the fray, the leisurely pace of the war came to an abrupt end. Imagine trying to fight a thoughtful, strategic battle when your opponent is three beings who can hurl 100 boulders at once without even breaking a sweat. The Titans' ponderous, single boulder at a time strategy was no match for this overwhelming, multi-armed assault. The final battle was finally, genuinely epic. The 100-handers unleashed a relentless barrage of mountains. Zeus, from the peak of Olympus, filled the sky with the blinding light and deafening crackle of his new thunderbolts. Poseidon shook the very earth with his trident, and Hades, cloaked in invisibility, moved unseen among the enemy ranks, sowing confusion and terror. The Titans, roused from their complacency, fought back with all their might. But the tide had turned. Their slow, methodical approach was completely overwhelmed by the combined, coordinated power of the Olympians and their new, formidable allies. The war ended. Cronus and the defeated Titans were overthrown. But what to do with them? Zeus, learning from the mistakes of both his father and grandfather, didn't just scatter them. He had them bound and cast into Tartarus, the very place from which he had freed his allies. It wasn't just a prison, it was a place for them to rest. Indefinitely, the great, powerful Titans were essentially sent to their room for a very, very long time out. Atlas, as a special punishment for being one of the lead generals, was condemned to hold up the sky for all eternity, a job that required immense strength, but also a whole lot of standing still. Perfectly suited for a Titan, perhaps. With the old order packed away, it was time to establish the new one. The world needed to be divided amongst the victorious brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. How did they decide who got what? A divine arm wrestling match. A series of heroic challenges. Nope. They drew lots. It was the fairest, most straightforward, and frankly, most efficient way to do it. They cast their lots, and destiny was decided. Zeus drew the longest lot, and with it, he became the king of the gods, the ruler of the sky and the heavens. His domain was the bright, expansive world above. Poseidon drew the second lot, granting him dominion over the seas, the oceans, and all the waters of the earth. His kingdom was the vast, mysterious, and ever-moving world below the surface. And Hades, who drew the shortest lot, became the lord of the underworld. His realm was the subterranean world of the dead, a place of shadows, wealth from the earth, and finality. And so began the age of the Olympians. It was a new era of grandeur, power, and divine drama. But even in their reign, you can see echoes of that sluggish, eternal pace they inherited from their predecessors. The gods meddled in mortal affairs, fell in love, and fought amongst themselves, but always with the unhurried confidence of beings who have all the time in the world. The Great Titanomachy wasn't just a war for control. It was a changing of the guard, a shift from one eternal dynasty to another. It marked the end of the Titans' long, sleepy reign, and the dawn of a slightly more energetic, but no less timeless age of the gods. Ever wonder how it all began? Not with a big bang, but with a big, quiet. Seriously, before everything we know, there was just chaos. But forget the image of a messy teenager's room or a wild rock concert. This chaos was more like an empty, silent void. Think of a vast, dark, perfectly still room where you could hear a pin drop. Except there were no pins and no floor for them to drop on. It was the ultimate state of nothingness, peaceful in its own strange way. No drama, no noise, just endless, calm potential, waiting for something, anything, to happen. From this immense quiet, the first being emerged. This was Gaia. You might know her as Mother Earth, but back then, she was just Earth. A huge, solid, patient entity. She didn't burst onto the scene with a grand entrance. She just sort of was. Imagine waking up slowly from a very, very long nap. That was Gaia. At the same time, another being formed. Tartarus. If Gaia was the ground floor, Tartarus was the deep, dark basement. He was the abyss, the deepest part of the underworld. But he wasn't spooky or evil. He just preferred the peace and quiet of living way underground. He was the ultimate introvert, happy in his own dark, silent space. So now we have Gaia, the vast expanse of land, and Tartarus, the deep abyss below. Gaia looked around at all the emptiness and probably thought, this is a bit plain. She wasn't in a rush, but she felt a creative spark. So, very slowly, she began to shape herself. She nudged up the first mountains, not with violent eruptions, but with gentle, patient pushes over it. Imagine a sculptor taking thousands of years to make a single carve. She coaxed out the seas, letting them pool calmly in the hollows she made. It was less of a flood and more of a slow, gentle filling of a bathtub. She was just adding a bit of scenery, a little texture to the endless flat canvas of her existence. After getting the basic landscape sorted, Gaia decided she needed some company, or at least some better scenery. So, she created Uranus, the sky. He wasn't born in a dramatic flash of lightning. He just sort of unfurled a vast, starry blanket that stretched out to cover her completely. It was a cozy arrangement. Gaia was the solid ground, and Uranus was the beautiful, sparkling ceiling. They were the first power couple, but their relationship was incredibly slow-paced. There were no grand romantic gestures, just a quiet, constant presence. The sky enveloping the earth, day in and day out. Together, Gaia and Uranus decided to populate their quiet little world. They had children, but these weren't your average kids. These were the Titans, huge, impressive beings, embodiments of a grand concept. There was Oceanus, the great river that circled the world, and Tethys, the mother of rivers and springs. There was Hyperion, who was basically the Protosun, a gentle, ambient light source, and his sister Theia, the gleam of the sky. They were all powerful, but they moved with a kind of majestic slowness. Think of them as giant, ancient trees. They were there, they were powerful, but they weren't exactly hyperactive. Life, if you could call it that, moved at a snail's pace, or maybe even slower. The Titans would just hang out, being titanic. Oceanus would flow placidly. Hyperion would glow softly. There were no deadlines, no appointments, no rush hour. Why hurry? There was nowhere to go and nothing to do yet. Even time itself, embodied by the Titan Kronos, felt sleepy. Clocks hadn't been invented, and if they had, their hands would have been stuck in molasses. The days, centuries, and millennia just drifted by in a calm, unhurried haze. This was the golden age of calm. No conflicts, no shouting matchas, just a world slowly taking shape. The mountains were still growing, the seas were still settling. The Titans were a quiet, slow-moving family. But even in this peaceful beginning, there were hints of the chaos to come. Uranus, the sky, started to get a bit possessive. He loved Gaia, but he also loved keeping her all to himself. He didn't like the idea of their children roaming around, potentially messing up his perfect starry view. So, when Gaia and Uranus had more children, things started to get complicated. These new kids were the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants who were brilliant craftsmen, and the Hecatonchires, who had 100 hands and 50 heads each. They were a bit much. Uranus looked at these loud, strange, powerful children and decided they were just too chaotic for his orderly skinned dirt setup. He thought they were an eyesore, a blight on his perfect creation. He couldn't stand them. So, what did this seemingly calm Sky Father do? He did something rather drastic. As soon as they were born, he took them and shoved them back into Gaia. He literally pushed them deep into the earth, back into her womb. It was a terrible, painful act. Gaia, the patient, calm earth, was now in constant agony. Imagine carrying not just the weight of mountains and seas, but also your own imprisoned, struggling children deep within you. Her peaceful existence was over. The quiet was broken by the rumblings of her trapped children and her own growing resentment. Gaia pleaded with Uranus. "Let them go," she'd say. "They're our children." But Uranus wouldn't listen. He liked things the way they were. Just him and Gaia, a perfect, quiet couple. The children were a noisy, messy complication he refused to deal with. This was the first major conflict, the first real crack in the tranquil facade of the early universe. The calm was officially over, and the seeds of rebellion were sown, not with a bang, but with the pained, muffled cries from deep within the earth. Gaia, enduring this torment, realized that talking wasn't going to work. She needed to take action. So, from deep within herself, she created something new. A material that was hard, sharp, and unyielding. She forged the very first weapon, a great, jagged sickle made of adamant. She then gathered her other children, the Titans, the ones who were still free. She showed them the sickle and explained her plan. Your father has become a tyrant. She told them, her voice filled with a pain that had been building for ages. He has imprisoned your brothers. One of you must be brave enough to stand up to him and end this. The Titans were silent. They were large and powerful, but they were also afraid. Uranus was their father, the all-encompassing sky. Who would dare to challenge him? They looked at each other, shuffling their massive feet. Fear kept them quiet. All except one, the youngest of the Titans, Cronus, the embodiment of time itself, stepped forward. He was ambitious and, more importantly, he resented his father's power. He looked at the sickle, then at his mother's anguished face. I'll do it, he said. And with that single decision, the quiet era of creation was about to come to a crashing, violent end. The slow, sleepy world was about to wake up, and it wasn't going to be a gentle awakening. The first great betrayal was set in motion, and the very concept of chaos was about to get a whole new, much louder definition. Have you ever wondered where humans came from? I mean, really, how did we get here? Forget the big, serious science lectures for a moment, and let's dive into a story that's a little more handmade. Tale starts with two brothers, Prometheus and Titans. You know, the big guys who were around before the gods we all know from the movies. Prometheus was the artsy one, the kind of guy who'd spend hours getting a single detail just right. He loved working with his hands. One day, he gets this brilliant idea. I'm going to create something new, something special. So he gets a big lump of clay, mixes it with a bit of river water, and starts sculpting. He's not just slapping it together. Oh no. He's a perfectionist. He spends ages smoothing the clay, shaping the fingers, getting the curve of the ear just so. This wasn't a rushed job. This was a passion project. He called them humans. And because he was so meticulous, it took a very long time. Meanwhile, his brother Epimetheus was, let's just say, he was the opposite. His name literally means afterthought, which tells you pretty much everything you need to know. He was easily distracted, a bit flighty. While Prometheus was painstakingly crafting humanity, Epimetheus was wandering around with a big bag of goodies from the gods. He saw Dare and thought, you look like you could use some speed. And poof, the Dare became swift. He saw a lion and went, you need something sharp, and bam, claws. He gave bears thick fur, turtles hard shells, birds the gift of flight. He was having a great time, handing out presents like a cosmic Santa Claus on a sugar rush. By the time Epimetheus ran out of gifts, he finally noticed what his brother was up to. He saw these finished clay figures, beautifully made but plain. "Hey, brother," he called out. "I finished giving out all the gifts. What did you get for your little clay people?" Prometheus looked up from his work, a frown on his face. He looked at his creations, then at his brother's empty bag. That's when it hit him. In his focus on making humans perfect, and with his brother's chaotic generosity, they'd been left with nothing. No claws, no fur, no wings, no super speed. They were just naked and vulnerable. Prometheus felt a pang of guilt. He'd made these delicate creatures, but he'd left them completely defenseless in a world full of fast, sharp, and well-armored animals. He couldn't just leave them like that. He had to give them something to level the playing field. He thought long and hard. What could he give them that was better than claws or shells? What could help them not just survive, but thrive? Then an idea sparked. A dangerous, brilliant idea. He looked up at Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. Up there, in the hearth of the gods, was fire. Fire was warmth. It was light in the darkness. It was a tool to cook food and forge metal. It was a weapon to keep predators at bay. Fire was power, but it belonged exclusively to the gods, especially the big boss Zeus. Zeus had made it very clear. No fire for the mortals. It was a strict rule. But Prometheus, driven by his love for his creation, decided the rule was meant to be broken. He snuck up to Olympus, quieter than a mouse. He found the sacred fire, took a single, glowing ember, and hid it inside a hollow fennel stalk. Then he tiptoed back down to earth. He presented the fire to the humans, who were huddled together, shivering and scared. At first, they were hesitant, but then they felt its warmth, saw its comforting glow chase away the shadows. It was a game changer. With fire, they could cook their food, making it easier to eat. They could stay warm through the cold nights. They could craft tools and build homes. Humanity, once naked and afraid, now had a warm, comfortable glow of hope. They had a future. Now, you can probably guess that the god-in-chief, Zeus, was not pleased. He was sitting up on his throne, probably sipping on some nectar, when he noticed a strange flicker of light down on earth. He looked closer and saw it. Fire. Little campfires dotted across the land. Zeus was furious. "Who dared?" he boomed, his voice like thunder. It didn't take long for him to figure out it was Prometheus. Disobeying a direct order from the king of the gods. That Zeus decided that both Prometheus and his pet project, humanity, needed to be taught a lesson. For Prometheus, the punishment was severe and famously gruesome. He was chained to a rock where an eagle would come every day to eat his liver, which would then grow back overnight. It's a rough deal, for sure. But what about humanity? Zeus couldn't just take the fire back. The spark had already been lit, so to speak. He needed a more subtle, more creative punishment. So he gathered the gods. "We need to create a gift for these humans," he said with a sly grin. "A beautiful, irresistible gift." Hephaestus, the smith god, was tasked with crafting a woman from clay, just as Prometheus had done. But this creation was different. Aphrodite gave her unparalleled beauty. Hermes gave her a clever, curious mind and a silver tongue. Athena taught her crafts and clothed her in stunning robes. They named her Pandora, which means soul-gifted, because every god had given her something. She was, by all accounts, perfect. Zeus then presented Pandora to Epimetheus. Now, remember Epimetheus? The afterthought brother. Prometheus had warned him, never, ever accept a gift from Zeus. But when Epimetheus saw Pandora, all warnings flew out of his head. He was completely captivated. He welcomed her with open arms. Along with Pandora, Zeus sent a little something extra. A beautifully ornate jar, or, in some versions, a box. It was heavy, sealed tight, and came with one simple instruction from Zeus, delivered with a wink. "Whatever you do, don't open this." Pandora was, as designed, incredibly curious. She saw this mysterious jar sitting in the corner, day after day. What could be inside? Jewels? The secret to eternal youth? The best cookie recipe ever? The not knowing was driving her crazy. She'd walk by it, trace its patterns with her finger, maybe give it a little shake. Epimetheus was no help. He was too busy being smitten to pay much attention to a dusty old jar. Finally, her curiosity got the better of her. It wasn't a malicious act, just a moment of mild, overwhelming curiosity, just a tiny peek. She probably thought to herself, "What's the harm?" She carefully, slowly lifted the lid. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. Instead, a swarm of dark, shadowy things came floating out, lazy and slow like smoke drifting on a summer breeze. These weren't monsters with fangs and claws. They were things like sickness, jealousy, greed, sorrow, pain, and old age. All the troubles of the world. They had been trapped in the jar, and now they were free, drifting out into the world to attach themselves to unsuspecting humans. Pandora, horrified, slammed the lid shut, but it was too late. Almost everything had escaped. Almost. She sat there, tears in her eyes, listening to the silence. Then she heard a tiny, faint tapping from inside the jar. Hesitantly, she lifted the lid one more time. just a crack. One last thing fluttered out. It wasn't dark or shadowy. It was a small, bright, shimmering light. It didn't rush out like the others. It hovered gently in the air. This was Elpis, the spirit of hope. It had been at the bottom of the jar, and because it wasn't in a hurry, it got left behind when all the troubles rushed out. And so, humanity, gifted with the fire of creation and innovation, was also burdened with all the hardships of life. But in the midst of all that trouble, they were given one last crucial gift. Hope. The belief that even on the darkest days, things can get better. It's the little light that stayed behind, not because it was weak, but because it was patient. It's the thing that keeps us going, the quiet whisper that reminds us to keep the fire burning, no matter what troubles come floating our way. So the next time you're feeling down, remember Pandora's jar. All the bad stuff in the world might be out and about, but so is hope. And hope, as it turns out, is a pretty powerful thing to have on your side. Have you ever heard a piece of music so beautiful it could calm a storm? So gentle it could soothe the wildest beast? Today, we're going to talk about a man whose music was exactly that. A melody that echoed with love, loss, and a journey into the very heart of darkness. This is the story of Orpheus and his soft music of the underworld. In the sun-drenched fields of ancient Greece, there lived a musician named Orpheus. He wasn't known for loud, triumphant anthems or songs that made you want to dance. No, his gift was something far more rare, far more intimate. When Orpheus played his lyre and sang, his music was like a gentle lullaby whispered on a summer evening. It was the sound of a soft breeze rustling through olive leaves, the quiet lapping of waves on a peaceful shore. Animals would pause their foraging, birds would hush their chatter, and even the babbling brooks seemed to quiet down just to listen. His music didn't demand attention. It invited it, creating a pocket of pure tranquility wherever he went. At the heart of this tranquility was his greatest inspiration. His wife, she was the sunlight in his world, the silent harmony to his melody. Their love was as gentle and profound as his music. They would spend their days wandering through meadows, his fingers strumming softly on his lyre, her laughter the sweetest counterpoint. He didn't need grand verses to express his love. It was there in every soft note he played. A continuous, unending song dedicated just to her. Their life together was a perfect, quiet symphony. But as all great stories teach us, even the most beautiful music can be interrupted by a sudden, jarring silence. One fateful day, while walking through a field, Eurydice was bitten by a venomous snake. The poison was swift, and before the sun could set on their happiness, she was gone. The world, for Orpheus, fell silent. The birdsong sounded shrill. The wind felt cold and empty. His lyre, once a source of boundless joy, now lay untouched, a mute testament to his grief. The music had died with her. For days, Orpheus was lost in a fog of sorrow. The world had lost its color, its warmth, its sound. But then, a thought, a desperate, impossible idea began to form. He had heard the legends of the underworld, the shadowy realm ruled by Hades, where the souls of the dead reside. Everyone knew it was a place of no return. But Orpheus wasn't just anyone. He had his music, and he wondered, could a melody born of such profound love and sorrow be powerful enough to change the laws of life and death? He decided he had to try. For Eurydice, he would face the impossible. So, with his lyre in hand, Orpheus began his descent. The path to the underworld was a place of dread and despair. A journey meant to strip away all hope. But Orpheus didn't fight the darkness with loud, defiant chords. Instead, he began to play. He played a tune of pure sorrow, a melody that spoke not of anger, but of a deep, aching void. It was a sound so soft, so filled with longing, that the very shadows seemed to pause and listen. His first great obstacle was Charon, the grim ferryman who carries souls across the river Styx. Charon was a creature of duty and silence, unmoved by pleas or bribes. As Orpheus approached the riverbank, he began to strum. The notes that flowed from his lyre weren't a demand for passage, but a shared grief. The music spoke of loss, of a world without light, a feeling Charon understood in his own eternal way. The old ferryman leaned on his pole, his ancient eyes closed, and for the first time in millennia, he felt something akin to pity. Without a word, he guided his boat to the shore and allowed Orpheus to cross. On the other side, a far more terrifying guardian awaited. Cerberus, the three-headed hound of hell. This monstrous beast was bred for ferocity, its growls echoing with the tormented cries of the damned. As its 6 glowing eyes fixed on the living man, it bared its fangs, ready to tear him apart. But Orpheus did not flinch. He sat on a nearby rock and began to play a different kind of song. This was a lullaby, the softest, most gentle tune he had ever composed. It was the melody of a sleeping world, of peaceful dreams and quiet rest. The monstrous dog's vicious growls slowly softened into confused whimpers. One by one, its 3 heads lowered onto its massive paws. The roars of a hellhound faded, and soon the only sound was the soft breathing of a deep, contented sleep. Orpheus walked past the slumbering beast, his music a gentle shield. As he ventured deeper, the tormented souls of the underworld, forever rushing to complete their eternal punishments, began to slow. Sisyphus paused. the great boulder resting on his shoulder. Tantalus forgot his unquenchable thirst. The music washed over them, not as a promise of freedom, but as a moment of respite, a brief, beautiful calm in their unending torment. For the first time, there was a hush in the land of the dead. Finally, Orpheus reached the throne room of the underworld. There sat Hades, the stern and unyielding king, and his queen, Persephone, who carried with her a memory of flowers and sunlight. Hades looked down, his face a mask of cold authority, annoyed by this mortal intrusion. He was ready to cast Orpheus into the deepest pits of Tartarus, but then Orpheus began to play. He played of his love for Eurydice, of the warmth of her hand in his, of the way she laughed. He played of the day he lost her, the sudden, crushing silence that followed. His music was not a demand or a challenge. It was a plea, a story told in notes of pure, unadulterated love and unbearable pain. The melody filled the vast, cold hall, not with echoes, but with a palpable warmth. Persephone, queen of the underworld but once a maiden of the spring, was the first to be moved. A tear, a single, crystalline drop, traced the path down her pale cheek as she remembered the beauty of the world above. Even Hades, the lord of all that is final and unchanging, felt his iron resolve begin to soften. The music wasn't trying to defeat him. It was sharing a grief so profound that even the god of the dead could understand it. The quiet lullaby had achieved what no force ever could. It had moved the heart of Hades. When the last note faded into the profound silence of the throne room, Hades spoke. His voice, usually the sound of cracking glaciers, was unusually soft. He told Orpheus that his music had earned him a favor never before granted. Eurydice would be allowed to return to the world of the living. She would follow him out of the underworld. But there was one condition, one simple, yet terrible rule. Orpheus must walk ahead and not look back at her, not even once, until they were both fully in the light of the sun. If he turned, she would be lost to him forever, with a heart filled with a fragile, trembling hope. Orpheus agreed. He thanked the silent king and queen, and turned to begin the long walk back. He couldn't see her, but he was told she was there, a silent shadow following his footsteps, and so he began his journey towards the light, his lyre now playing a new tune. It was a melody of anticipation, a quiet, hopeful rhythm to guide their steps. He walked slowly, deliberately, each footstep a prayer. The path seemed longer, darker, and more treacherous on the way up. The silence behind him was immense, a heavy blanket of nothingness. Was she really there? Was this some cruel trick? He resisted the urge to listen for her footsteps, knowing the sounds of the underworld could play tricks on the mind. He focused only on his music, a soft, steady beat, a lifeline pulling them both towards the sun. He passed the sleeping Cerberus, crossed the river Styx once more, Charon nodding silently as he went by. The climb was steep, and doubt began to creep into his heart. A quiet, insidious whisper. It was a different kind of darkness, the darkness of the mind. The silence was maddening. Did she trip? Was she struggling? Is she even there? The questions multiplied, each one a heavier weight on his soul. He could see it now, a pinprick of light in the distance. The exit, the sun, the world of the living. His heart hammered in his chest. Just a few more steps. He was so close. The light grew, spilling over the threshold of the cave mouth. He felt the warmth of the sun on his face, the first rays of dawn touching his skin. He had made it. He was back in the world of the living. But what about Eurydice? Was she right behind him? Had her foot also crossed the threshold into the light? In that final moment, at the very edge of salvation, the doubt that had been quietly growing bloomed into an unbearable panic. The silence was too much. The need to know, to see her, to be sure, overwhelmed his resolve. Just before stepping fully into the sunlight, he turned. For a single heartbreaking instant, he saw her. She was there, just a step behind him. Her form still faint, half in shadow, half in light. Her eyes met his, filled not with anger, but with a deep, sorrowful understanding. And then, as the sunlight fully touched him but not yet her, she began to fade. She was like smoke caught in a breeze, a dream dissolving upon waking. He heard her whisper his name, a sound as soft and final as a sigh, and then she was gone, pulled back into the darkness forever. He had failed at the very last second. His own human doubt had unraveled the miracle his music had wrought. Orpheus stood alone at the mouth of the underworld, the joyous sun on his face feeling like a cruel mockery. The world he returned to was as silent and empty as it had been the day she died. His soft music, the lullaby that had charmed gods and monsters, could not save him from himself. The story is tragic, but when you think about it, it's not a loud, crashing tragedy. It's a slow, quiet one. It feels like a song that builds with hope, only to fade away into a long, final exhale into silence. You know the Trojan War, right? Epic battles, legendary heroes, a giant wooden horse. It sounds like the most action-packed story ever told. But what if I told you the whole thing moved at the pace of a tortoise on a lazy Sunday afternoon? Seriously, the slow burn trend has nothing on ancient Greece. The Trojan War wasn't just a war. It was a masterclass in procrastination. Let's start at the very beginning with the event that kicked everything off. A divine beauty contest. The goddess of discord, Eris, wasn't invited to a wedding, so she decided to stir up some trouble. She tossed a golden apple inscribed to the fairest among the goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Now, you'd think the king of the gods, Zeus, would just pick one and get it over with. But no. Zeus, being a savvy politician, knew there was no right answer here. Picking his wife, Hera, would look like favoritism. Picking Athena or Aphrodite would mean an eternity of nagging from the other two. He outsourced the decision to a mortal, a poor, unsuspecting shepherd prince named Paris of Troy. Finding Paris and setting up this whole judgment thing wasn't exactly an overnight affair. It involved Hermes, the messenger god, tracking him down on a remote mountain and explaining the high-stakes situation. So there's Paris, just trying to live his life, when suddenly he's asked to judge a cosmic beauty pageant. The three goddesses didn't make it easy either. This wasn't a quick once-over. They each presented their case, complete with some very tempting bribes. Hera offered him political power to be the king of all Europe and Asia. Imagine that. Unlimited influence. Endless territory. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare, offered him victory in every battle and unmatched strategic skill. He'd be the greatest general the world had ever known. And then came Aphrodite, the goddess of love. She offered him something a little different. The love of the most beautiful mortal woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris didn't just snap, he actually thought about it. For a while, a long while. Power is great, but it comes with a lot of responsibility. Unbeatable military skill is cool, but what's the point if you have no one to come home to? Love, on the other hand, that's the stuff of songs and poems. After much deliberation, probably more than was strictly necessary, he handed the golden apple to Aphrodite. Decision made, case closed. Except, not really. This was just the slow-motion start of an even slower conflict. Aphrodite made good on her promise. She arranged for Paris to sail to Sparta, where he was welcomed as a guest by King Menelaus and his wife, the one and only Helen. While Menelaus was conveniently away, Paris and Helen fell in love. Depending on the version of the myth, Paris just straight up abducted her. Either way, they sailed back to Troy together. When Menelaus returned to an empty palace, he was furious. He immediately went to his brother Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece, and demanded action. But action in ancient Greece wasn't like sending a quick text to rally your friends. It was a bureaucratic nightmare. Agamemnon had to send messengers to all the other Greek kings and chiefs. These weren't city-states just down the road. We're talking about a vast, scattered network of kingdoms. Each messenger had to travel by foot or by ship, deliver the message, and then wait for a response. Some kings were eager to join. They had sworn an oath years earlier to defend Helen's marriage. But others, they dragged their feet. Odysseus, the clever king of Ithaca, famously pretended to be insane to avoid going. He started plowing his fields with salt, a clear sign something was off. It took another clever Greek leader, Palamedes, to call his bluff by placing Odysseus's infant son in the path of the plow. Odysseus swerved, proving his sanity, and was forced to join the expedition. This whole recruitment process took months, maybe even years. Gathering the troops, building the ships, and assembling the supplies was a monumental task. The legendary 1,000 ships didn't just appear at the port of Aulis overnight. After all that administrative delay, they finally set sail for Troy. But their problems were far from over. The winds wouldn't cooperate. The fleet was stuck. A seer revealed that the goddess Artemis was angry and demanded a sacrifice to calm the winds. This led to one of the most tragic and drawn-out parts of the pre-war saga. Another delay that tested the resolve of the entire army. Finally, after immense personal cost, the winds turned, and the Greek fleet finally reached the shores of Troy. So, the war begins. Right. Swords clashing, arrows flying. Well, yes, but also no. The Trojan War lasted for 10 years. 10 years! Think about that. Most modern wars don't last that long. For a decade, two armies were camped outside a city, engaging in a cycle of battles, truces, and long periods of just waiting. The fighting wasn't continuous. There would be intense days of battle, followed by weeks or months of stalemate. They'd have strategy meetings that probably went on forever. Imagine a Zoom call with 100 Greek heroes, all with massive egos, trying to agree on a plan. It would be endless. No, Achilles, we can't just charge in. Hector, your defensive formation is flawed. Odysseus, stop trying to trick everyone. Even the one-on-one duels, the supposed highlights of epic warfare, could be incredibly slow. Before fighting, heroes would often stop to have a conversation. They'd introduce themselves, list their entire family lineage, brag about their famous ancestors, and maybe even discover they were distant cousins. There is a famous scene where the Greek hero Diomedes and the Trojan ally Glaucus are about to fight. They stop, have a chat, realize their grandfathers were friends, and decide to exchange armor instead of fighting. It's a nice moment of humanity, but it's not exactly fast-paced action. And then we have the most famous sulk in literary history. In the 9th year of the war, Achilles, the greatest warrior of them all, gets into an argument with Agamemnon over a war prize. His pride is wounded. So what does he do? He goes on strike. He takes his soldiers, the Myrmidons, and sits in his tent, refusing to fight. This wasn't a short-lived tantrum. Achilles sulked for a huge chunk of the war. The entire Greek army was getting hammered. His friends were dying, but he just sat there, stewing. The narrative grinds to a halt while the Greeks desperately try to convince him to come back. They send embassies. They offer him gifts. They beg him. It asked an entire season of a TV show dedicated to getting the main character out of his trailer. Only when his best friend Patroclus is killed by the Trojan prince, Hector does Achilles finally rejoin the fight. And yes, His return is spectacular and devastating, but it's a brief, explosive climax after a very, very long period of inactivity. Even the end of the war was less about a single, decisive battle and more about a slow, clever trick. After 10 years of failing to breach the city walls, the Greeks didn't win by force. They won with an idea: the Trojan horse. But even this iconic moment involved a lot of waiting. The Greeks had to build this massive wooden structure, which must have taken ages. Then they had to pretend to sail away, hide their fleet just out of sight, and wait to see if the Trojans would fall for the trick. The Trojans, in turn, spent a whole day debating what to do with the horse. It's a gift. No, it's a trap. Let's burn it. No, let's bring it inside. It was another committee meeting, this time with the fate of their city on the line. They finally drag the horse into the city, celebrate their supposed victory, and fall asleep. Only then, under the cover of darkness, do the Greek soldiers emerge and finally sack. The end was swift and brutal, but it came after a decade of agonizingly slow progress. So, when you think of the Trojan War, don't just picture the clashing of shields. Picture the endless meetings, the logistical nightmares, the diplomatic squabbles, and the long, boring afternoons spent waiting for something, anything, to happen. It was a story of grand passions and epic heroes, but it was also a story built on delays, deliberations, and procrastination. It reminds us that even the most legendary events in history were probably a lot slower and more complicated than we imagine. The Trojan War wasn't a sprint. It was a 10-year marathon with a wooden horse at the finish line. Have you ever felt like you're just wandering in circles, sighing at the same old scenery every day? Well, you might have more in common with the Minotaur than you think. Let's talk about the famous story of Theseus and the Labyrinth, but maybe not in the way you've heard it before. This isn't just a tale of epic battles and heroic deeds. It's a story about confusion, patience, and a hero who was just as human as any of us. Our story begins with a hero's journey. Prince Theseus of Athens, a young man with a strong sense of justice, and maybe a little too much confidence, volunteers for a grim mission. Every year, Athens had to send 7 young men and 7 young women as tribute to King Minos of Crete, because Minos' son had been killed in Athens, and this was his terrible form of revenge. These youths were destined for the Labyrinth, a massive, mind-bending maze designed by the genius inventor Daedalus, and at its center lived the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. Theseus declared he would go as one of the tributes, but he had no intention of becoming monster food. He was going to slay the Minotaur and end the tribute once and for all. So, he set sail for Crete, his heart full of courage. When he arrived, his noble bearing and determination caught the eye of someone very important, Princess Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos himself. She was struck by his bravery and couldn't bear the thought of him being lost forever in the dark corridors of the maze. So, Ariadne decided to help him. She secretly met with Theseus and gave him two crucial items. The first was a sword, which is pretty standard for a hero, but the second was far more clever. A simple ball of thread. She told him to tie one end to the entrance of the labyrinth and unwind it as he walked. That way, after dealing with the Minotaur, he could follow the thread back out. Labyrinths, you see, are confusing even when there isn't a giant monster waiting for you. It's easy to lose your way, to feel disoriented, and to panic. Ariadne's thread was a lifeline, a promise of return. With the thread in hand, Theseus stood at the imposing entrance to the labyrinth. The doors creaked open, revealing a darkness that seemed to swallow the light. He tied the end of the thread securely, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The air grew cool and damp, and the sounds of the outside world faded away, replaced by the echo of his own footsteps. The walls were tall and seamless, offering no clues, no vantage points. Every corner looked the same. Every passage seemed to lead back to where he started. This is where our story takes a slightly different turn. We often imagine the labyrinth as a place of constant terror, with the Minotaur hunting its victims relentlessly. But let's imagine it from the Minotaur's perspective. It was born into this prison, a lonely existence in a world of repeating patterns. For years, its life was an endless loop of stone corridors. It probably wasn't always a raging beast. Maybe it was mostly just ... bored. Imagine spending your entire life pacing the same hallways, sighing at the monotony of it all. The occasional arrival of tributes was likely a brief, tragic interruption to an otherwise mind-numbingly dull existence. Meanwhile, Theseus wasn't charging through the maze with his sword held high. He was moving carefully, methodically. He walked quietly, his senses on high alert, placing one foot in front of the other. The ball of thread unspooled behind him, a thin, fragile line connecting him to the outside world. He turned corner after corner with a kind of patient anticipation. There was no rush. In a place designed to confuse, speed is your enemy. He had to trust the process, trust the thread, and trust himself. He was listening, waiting, preserving his energy for the inevitable confrontation. Days could have passed in that timeless twilight. Finally, deep within the heart of the maze, he heard it. Not a ferocious roar, but a heavy, mournful sigh. He followed the sound and found the creature was just standing there, in a small central chamber, looking less like a monster and more like a weary prisoner. When it saw Theseus, there was a flicker of surprise, then a sad resignation. The battle that followed wasn't the furious, lightning-fast clash of swords and horns you might see in movies. It was more like a slow, heavy wrestling match. Two powerful beings, one fueled by a hero's purpose and the other by a lifetime of confusion and sorrow. They grappled in the dim light, a clumsy, powerful struggle of strength and will. Theseus, being a trained warrior, eventually gained the upper hand. The fight ended not with a triumphant roar, but with a quiet finality. The great beast was defeated. Silence returned to the labyrinth. The only sound was Theseus' own heavy breathing. He stood there for a moment, the weight of his actions settling upon him. He was a hero, yes, but he had just ended a life. Then he remembered his purpose. He found a thread, a comforting, tangible link to his freedom. Grasping it tightly, he began the long journey back. He didn't run, he walked, carefully retracing his steps, winding the thread back into a ball. The path that had seemed so confusing on the way in was now clear, a single defined route out of the darkness. When he finally emerged from the labyrinth, the sunlight was almost blinding. It felt unnaturally bright, warm, and alive after so much time spent in the monochrome world of the maze. Ariadne and the other Athenian tributes were waiting, their faces filled with hope and anxiety. Seeing him emerge victorious, they erupted in cheers. They quickly and quietly made their way back to their ship and set sail, escaping Crete before King Minos could discover what had happened. Their journey back to Athens should have been a triumphant one. But here's where the story adds another very human layer. Before leaving for Crete, Theseus had promised his father, King Aegeus, that if he were successful, he would replace his ship's black sails of mourning with white sails of victory. But in the exhaustion and excitement of the escape, and perhaps his lingering thoughts on the events in the labyrinth, Theseus forgot. He was so focused on getting everyone home safely, he just made a sleepy mistake. King Aegeus had been watching the horizon for days, waiting for his son's return. When he saw the ship approaching with its black sails still raised, his heart broke. Believing his son was dead, he was overcome with grief and threw himself from a cliff into the sea. That sea is now named the Aegean Sea, a permanent reminder of a hero's very human error. So what does this story really tell us? It shows us that heroism isn't just about strength and fighting monsters. It's about patience, ingenuity, and trust in the plan, like following a simple thread through a complex problem. It reminds us they get tired, they get distracted, and they make mistakes with tragic consequences. Theseus was a great hero, but he was also a person who forgot a crucial detail. It makes him more relatable, more real, and it serves as a powerful reminder to all of us. Even after our greatest victories, we need to be mindful of the small details. They can often matter the most. Have you ever heard the story of Perseus and Medusa? Of course, you have. The brave hero, the terrifying monster, the epic battle. But what if I told you the version you know is, well, let's just say it's been a little exaggerated for dramatic effect. The real story, the one they don't tell you, is a lot quieter. It's less about a monstrous clash and more about a very polite, very awkward errand. Let's set the scene. Young Perseus is given a seemingly impossible task. Bring back the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turns men to stone. Now, in the popular version, this is a death sentence. But in our story, the gods treated it more like a challenging but manageable chore. Like assembling a piece of furniture from a flat-packed box. Hermes and Athena showed up, not with thunder and lightning, but with a helpful, almost cheaper attitude. Right then, Perseus Hermes probably said, handing over a pair of winged sandals. These are the new Air Hermes 3000s. You'll get great mileage, and they're surprisingly comfortable. Athena followed, presenting a brilliantly polished shield. Now, this is crucial, she'd explain. You'll use this like a rear-view mirror. Don't look directly at her, not because she's evil, but because it's just plain awkward for everyone involved. Think of it as avoiding eye contact on a crowded bus. They also gave him a special bag, the Kibisis, which was essentially a high-end, magically sealed tote bag for the head. And finally, a helmet of invisibility from Hades. Not for terrifying sneak attacks, but more for slipping in and out without causing a fuss. It was the ancient Greek equivalent of ghosting someone. With all his gear, Perseus felt less like a warrior and more like a very well-equipped delivery boy on a peculiar quest. So, off he flew. The journey itself was surprisingly pleasant. The winged sandals made a gentle whooshing sound, and the view was spectacular. He eventually arrived at the Gorgon's lair, expecting a dark, foreboding place filled with screams and the smell of sulfur. Instead, it was more like a quiet, slightly dusty sculpture garden. The victims turned to stone weren't frozen in expressions of terror. One looked like he was about to sneeze. Another was mid-yawn. A third seemed to be admiring his own reflection in a puddle. It was less a gallery of horrors and more a collection of people caught in mundane, slightly embarrassing moments. Perseus, being a considerate fellow, tiptoed through the stone figures. He even straightened the statue's slightly crooked helmet. Wouldn't want him to be uncomfortable for eternity, he probably muttered to himself. The whole place had a sleepy, almost peaceful vibe. The only sound was a faint, rhythmic hissing. Perseus followed the sound, his invisible helmet making him feel like a polite intruder. He peeked around the large rock and saw her. Medusa. She wasn't a raging beast. She was sitting on a flat stone, her snack hair gently swaying. The hissing wasn't menacing. It was soft, like wind rustling through dry leaves. Some of the little snakes were actually yawning, their tiny mouths opening in unison. Medusa herself was looking down at her hands, tracing patterns on the cave floor with a long, elegant finger. She looked bored, maybe even a little lonely. Here was this being, cursed with a terrible power, living in forced isolation. The tragedy wasn't her monstrousness, but her solitude. Perseus felt a pang of sympathy. This wasn't a monster to be slain. It was a problem to be solved, albeit in a very permanent way. He remembered Athena's instructions. Avoid direct eye contact. Be quick. Be clean. It felt less like a heroic deed and more like performing a delicate, necessary procedure. He took a deep breath, raised the polished shield, and approached from behind. He watched her reflection, a shimmering, distorted image on the bronze surface. She hadn't moved. The snakes on her head seemed to sense his presence, their hissing picking up slightly in curiosity rather than aggression. A few of them turned their little heads, their forked tongues flicking out. Perseus held his breath. He was so close now. Using the reflection as his guide, he drew his sword, a gift from him, perfectly balanced and sharp enough to cut through anything without a fuss. He positioned the blade, aiming for a swift, clean cut. It was the most respectful way to do it. No struggle, no fight, just a quiet, efficient completion of his task. He swung. The motion was fluid, silent, and just like that, it was over. There was no monstrous shriek, no final, agonizing cry, just a soft sigh, as if a great tension had been released. The body slumped forward gently, and the snakes on her severed head went limp, their hissing fading into complete silence. Perseus, still invisible, quickly and respectfully placed the head into the magical tote bag. He sealed it tight, feeling a strange mix of relief and melancholy. He had succeeded, but it didn't feel like a victory. As he turned to leave, something incredible happened. From the spot where Medusa had fallen, a form began to rise. It wasn't grotesque or horrifying. Instead, a magnificent winged horse, pure white and shimmering, began to emerge. This was Pegasus, but he didn't burst forth in a chaotic explosion of divine power. He appeared calmly, unfolding his wings as if stretching after a long, deep sleep. He blinked his large, intelligent eyes, shook out his glorious mane, and looked around with a sense of gentle curiosity. He took a few wobbly steps, then steadied himself. He spotted Perseus, or rather, the shimmer in the air where the invisible Perseus stood. The horse didn't bolt or shy away. He simply dipped his head in a gesture that seemed like a polite nod. "Thanks for the help," it seemed to say. Perseus, still invisible, found himself nodding back. With his quest complete, Perseus mounted the calm, friendly Pegasus. The horse took to the sky, not with a frantic beat of its wings, but with a powerful, graceful ascent. They soared over the quiet sculpture garden and out into the open sky. As they flew, Perseus looked back one last time at the cave. It was just a cave now. Silent. The story of Perseus and Medusa became a legend, told and retold, each time getting grander, louder, and more monstrous. The quiet awkwardness was replaced by epic battles, the polite hero by a boastful warrior, and the lonely Gorgon by a shrieking fiend. But Perseus knew the truth. He knew it wasn't a story of slaying a monster. It was the story of a difficult, somber task, performed with as much dignity and respect as possible. It was a story of a polite hero, a quiet Gorgon, and a flying horse that was born with a gentle stretch. And maybe, just maybe, that quiet, forgotten version of the story is the most heroic one of all. When we think of Hercules, what comes to mind? Ripped muscles, epic battles, a hero of legendary strength, right? We imagined him charging headfirst into danger, a whirlwind of power and fury. The 12 labors, probably done in a whirlwind of a week, tops. But what if I told you the real story is a bit different? What if Hercules, the mightiest hero of all, was actually the master of taking it slow? Let's rewind and look at the real Hercules, not the one from the blockbuster movies. This is the story of Hercules, the steady adventurer. Yes, he was unbelievably strong, but he also knew the value of a good break. His 12 labors weren't a mad dash. They were a marathon, a series of epic chores completed with patience, planning, and probably a lot of thoughtful sighing. Take his very first labor, slaying the Nemean lion. This wasn't your average lion. Its golden fur was impenetrable, meaning no arrow or spear could pierce it. So, What did Hercules do? He didn't just run in swinging his club like a madman. That would have been pointless. Instead, he tracked the beast patiently. He observed its habits, learned its patterns, and cornered it in its own lair. The fight itself wasn't a quick, explosive clash. It was a long, grueling wrestling match. Imagine this. The strongest man in the world, locked in a slow, strategic embrace with an unkillable lion. Hercules had to use his brain as much as his brawn. He wasn't just overpowering it, he was outmaneuvering it, looking for a weakness. It was a slow, deliberate process of repositioning, grappling, and applying pressure. It was a battle of endurance, not just raw power. He had to be steady, to conserve his energy, and to wait for the perfect moment. And when he finally won, it wasn't through a flashy finishing move, but by using his immense strength in a precise, controlled way. Then there's the second labor, slaying the Lernaean Hydra. This was a nightmare creature, a multi-headed water serpent, the real kicker. For every head you lopped off, two more grew back in its place. A classic case of the more you rush, the worse it gets. An impatient hero would have been quickly overwhelmed, creating an endless forest of new heads. But Hercules wasn't an impatient hero. He had his nephew, Iolaus, by his side, and they came up with a plan. This was a 2% job that required perfect timing and coordination. Hercules would slice off a head, and immediately, Iolaus would cauterize the stump with a burning torch to stop it from regrowing. This wasn't a frantic hack, it was a rhythm, a steady, methodical process. One head at a time. It required intense focus and the discipline not to get flustered as the monstrous creature thrashed around. They had to be calm under pressure, moving with a steady, calculated pace until the last head was gone. It was a victory of teamwork and strategy, not just brute force. Let's move on to one of the grossest jobs in history. Cleaning the Augean stables. King Augeas had thousands of cattle, and their stables hadn't been cleaned in over 30 years. You can just imagine the scale of this task. We're talking mountains of, well, you know. Another hero might have grabbed a shovel and started digging, only to give up in despair after a few days. But Hercules, he took a good long look at the problem. He probably walked around the entire complex, hands on his hips, muttering to himself, "There has to be a better way." He wasn't thinking about how to work harder. He was thinking about how to work smarter. And that's when he had his brilliant idea. He noticed two powerful rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, flowed nearby. So, instead of shoveling for the rest of his life, he spent a day digging trenches. He diverted the course of both rivers, sending a massive torrent of water flushing through the stables. Whoosh! In a single day, the work of decades was washed away. This labor wasn't about strength at all. It was about observation, ingenuity, and a good understanding of hydroengineering. It was about taking a long pause to plan before lifting a single finger. The ultimate example of working smarter, not harder. Hercules understood that sometimes the most powerful tool you have is your brain, and a bit of creative thinking can save you a world of effort. And the adventures didn't get any less complicated. Think about his quest to capture the Erymanthian boar, a giant, fearsome beast that terrorized the countryside. A direct confrontation would be incredibly dangerous. So what did our steady hero do? He chased it. 4 days. He didn't try to fight it on its own terms in the forest. He drove it from its home, up into the mountains, into a deep snowdrift. He tired it out. He used the environment to his advantage. By the time he finally cornered the boar, it was exhausted and stuck in the snow, making the capture much easier. It was a victory of persistence and clever tactics. Then there was the mission to capture the Ceryneian hind, a deer so fast it could outrun an arrow. This deer was sacred to the goddess Artemis, so Hercules couldn't harm it. This wasn't a task for strength, but for incredible, mind-boggling patience. Do you know how long he pursued this deer? A full year. For 365 days, Hercules tracked this magical creature across the lands. He never gave up, never lost his focus. It was a marathon of tracking, a testament to his unbelievable endurance and resolve. He didn't rush. He just kept going, one steady step at a time, until the deer finally tired and he could safely capture it. Even fetching the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides was a masterclass in slow, careful work. First, he didn't even know where the garden was. This wasn't a simple go there, get that mission. It was a massive intelligence gathering operation. He had to travel the world, ask for directions, and solve riddles. He had a long chat with the sea god Nereus, and an even more interesting negotiation with the Titan Atlas. The key to this labor was delegation. Hercules knew holding up the sky was a job for a Titan. So he made a deal with Atlas. You go get the apples for me, and I'll hold up the sky for you while you're gone. It was a clever, strategic move. But can you imagine the sheer patience required to stand there, holding the entire weight of the heavens on your shoulders, just waiting? Hercules wasn't just tapping his foot, checking his watch. He was bearing an impossible burden, steadily waiting for Atlas to return. He was literally holding the world in place, a perfect metaphor for his calm, unshakable nature. Through all these labors, we see a pattern. Hercules wasn't just a muscle-bound warrior. He was a thinker, a planner, a strategist. He took his time. He rested. He sipped water. We can imagine him stretching his sore back after a long day of wrestling or tracking, muttering about how every single one of these tasks seemed to involve more walking than he'd signed up for. His story redefines what it means to be a hero. It's not always about the flashy, explosive moments. Sometimes heroism is the quiet, relentless pursuit of a goal. It's the patience to wait for the right opportunity. It's the wisdom to know when to fight and when to think. It's the endurance to keep going when the task seems endless. Hercules completed his epic chores on an immortal schedule, not a mortal one. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew that the biggest challenges aren't conquered with speed, but with steadiness. He became the most famous hero in history, not just because he was strong, but because he was patient, clever, and persistent. He was the hero who proved that slow and steady doesn't just win the race, can also defeat monsters, clean stables, and even hold up the sky. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by a big project or a daunting task, remember the steady adventures of Hercules. Take a deep breath, make a plan, and remember that true strength isn't just about power. It's about patience. Ever wondered what the world was like before Zeus and the flashy Olympians took over? You might picture epic battles and constant chaos, but the truth is way more. Chill. Welcome to the age of the Titans, a time when the universe was run by a bunch of powerful beings who honestly seemed to prefer a nice, long nap over pretty much anything else. For what felt like an eternity, the cosmos was a quiet, stable place under the rule of the Titans. These weren't your monster of the week villains. They were the original gods, the children of Gaia, the Earth, and Uranus, the sky. They were cosmic forces, sure, but they were also a family. And like any family, they had their share of drama, just played out on a universal scale. Their leader was Cronus, the youngest and most ambitious of the original 12. Now, you've probably heard of him. He's famous for overthrowing his own father, Uranus, and taking the throne. It was a pretty dramatic start. I'll give him that. But once he got the crown, Cronus seemed to decide he'd had enough excitement for a lifetime. He and his siblings, who ruled over different parts of the cosmos, settled into a long, leisurely reign. This era was later called the Golden Age. The earth was bountiful, there was no need for work, and everyone lived in peace. It sounds like a paradise, right? Well, it was, for the most part. The Titans weren't micromanagers. They let the world run itself, preferring to spend their days in their magnificent palace on Mount Athres, just enjoying the view. Things were predictable, stable, and honestly, a little bit boring. Cronus, in particular, valued order above all else. He liked his days to be the same. Wake up, rule the universe without much fuss, go back to sleep. He wasn't a cruel tyrant in the way you might think. He was more like a cosmic couch potato who just happened to be in charge of everything. He had a beautiful wife, his sister Rhea, the tightness of motherhood, and the earth's rhythm. They were the ultimate power couple, ruling over a peaceful, if somewhat sleepy world. But there was a dark cloud hanging over this golden paradise, a tiny whisper of a prophecy that kept Cronus from ever truly relaxing. You see, when he overthrew his father, Uranus had cursed him. He said that, just as Cronus had been overthrown by his son, Cronus too would be overthrown by one of his own children. This prophecy haunted him. It was a constant source of anxiety in his otherwise tranquil existence. He was the king of the universe, all-powerful, and yet he was terrified of his own future kids. He couldn't shake the fear. Every time Rhea announced she was expecting, his paranoia would spike. He saw every potential child not as a joy, but as a threat, a ticking time bomb set to destroy his peaceful reign. So, he came up with a solution, a truly horrifying, yet strangely practical solution from his paranoid point of view. When their first child, Hestia, was born, Rhea presented the beautiful baby to her husband. Cronus looked at the tiny goddess, the future of their dynasty, and instead of a cradle, he put her in his mouth and swallowed her whole. Yeah, you heard that right. He just... ate. Ate her, not in a monstrous, chewing her two bits kind of way. It was more like he was tidying her away, putting her somewhere safe where she couldn't possibly grow up to overthrow him. One by one, as Rhea gave birth to their children, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, Cronus would calmly take the newborn and swallow them. He was collecting his children inside his own stomach, creating a bizarre internal family reunion. For Rhea, this was an unimaginable heartbreak. She was the goddess of motherhood, and she was forced to watch her husband devour every single one of their children. Her palace, which should have been filled with the laughter of little gods, was silent. Her heart ached with a grief that echoed through the quiet halls of Mount Oath. She pleaded with Cronus, but his fear was stronger than his love. He was convinced this was the only way to protect his throne and maintain the quiet order he cherished so much. The universe remained peaceful on the outside, but inside Rhea, a storm of sorrow and anger was brewing. She couldn't bear to lose another child. As she became pregnant with her sixth, she knew she had to do something different. This time, she wasn't going to hand her baby over. This time, she would fight back. Desperate, she went to her parents, Gaia and Uranus, for help. They had seen this story play out before, and they sympathized with their daughter's pain. They devised a secret plan. Rhea would go to the island of Crete to give birth in secret, far away from Cronus's watchful eyes. In a deep, dark cave on Mount Ida, Rhea gave birth to her youngest son. She named him Zeus. Holding him in her arms, she felt a fierce, protective love she hadn't been allowed to feel for her other children. She knew she couldn't keep him, not if she wanted him to live, but she couldn't let Cronus have him either. So, following her parents' advice, Rhea did something clever. She found a large, smooth stone about the size of a newborn baby. She wrapped it tightly in swaddling clothes, making it look just like a bundled infant. With a heavy heart, she left Zeus in the care of nymphs on the island and returned to Mount Tothres. Rabspranta, here is our newest child, she said, her voice trembling but steady. Cronus, in his usual paranoid haste, didn't even bother to look closely. He was so used to his routine, so confident in his terrible solution, that he just took the bundle and swallowed it whole, just as he had done with the others. He felt the weight in his stomach and, satisfied that the threat was neutralized, went back to his quiet life, completely unaware that he had just swallowed a rock. Meanwhile, on the island of Crete, a future king was growing up in total secrecy. Baby Zeus was raised in the idyllic wilderness, far from the stuffy, silent palace of the Titans. His caretakers were a group of gentle nymphs who adored him and tended to his every need. His wet nurse was a goat named Amalthea, who provided him with endless milk. Her horn, which one day broke off, became the legendary cornucopia, the horn of plenty, a symbol of the abundance that surrounded the young god. To keep Cronus from hearing the baby's cries, a band of warrior spirits called the Caretes would clash their spears and shields together, dancing and shouting whenever Zeus made a noise. Their clatter drowned out any sound, echoing through the mountains and keeping the secret safe. Unlike the silent, orderly world of the Titans, Zeus's childhood was filled with noise, nature, and freedom. He grew up strong and wild, playing in the forests and climbing the mountains of Crete. He had no idea who his parents were, or the destiny that awaited him. He was just a boy, albeit a very powerful one, growing up in a peaceful corner of the world, completely oblivious to the fact that his 5 siblings were living in their father's stomach, and that he was the prophesied one who would change everything. The long, leisurely rule of the Titans was ticking towards its end, and they didn't even know it. Cronus continued his quiet reign, confident that he had outsmarted fate. The universe remained in its golden age slumber. But on a remote island, a storm was brewing in the form of a young god with lightning in his veins. The quiet was about to be broken, and the leisurely days of the Titans were numbered. The stage was being set for a war that would shake the cosmos to its very foundations. A war between the old guard and the new, between father and son. Have you ever noticed how the sky changes? One moment it's a vast empty blue, and the next clouds gather, forming shapes that look A dragon, a face, a ship sailing on an airy sea. The ancient Greeks saw this too, and in their stories, the king of the gods Zeus was just as changeable as the weather. He wasn't always the loud, thunder-wielding figure we imagine. Sometimes he was much quieter, softer, moving through the world like a slow, drifting thought. This wasn't about power or grand displays. It was about something more subtle, a quiet curiosity. Zeus had a habit of wanting to get closer to the mortal world, to walk among people without causing a stir, and to know that he would transform. He wouldn't just snap his fingers and appear. No, the stories, when you read them between the lines, suggest a more deliberate, almost artistic process. It was as if he savored the moment of becoming something else. Imagine him high on Olympus, looking down at the world below. He sees a field, a river, a quiet home, and decides he wants to visit. But how? As himself, too much fuss. So he considers his options. He could be a gust of wind, rustling the leaves in an olive grove. He could be a stream of sunlight, a golden shower falling softly from a cloudless sky, each droplet of light catching the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. It's a gentle, almost lazy decision. There's no rush. The world is moving at its own pace, and he decides to join it, not disrupt it. One of his most famous transformations was for a princess named Europa. She was playing by the seashore with her friends, gathering flowers. Now, the usual telling of this story is dramatic, a sudden abduction. But let's imagine it differently. Let's imagine it quietly. A magnificent white bull wanders out from the trees. It's not frightening or aggressive. Its eyes are calm, almost sleepy. It moves with a slow, deliberate grace, its hooves barely making a sound on the soft grass. Europa and her friends stop their games, curious. This isn't just any bull. It seems peaceful. It lowers its great head and makes a soft, rumbling sound, more like a cat's purr than a bovine bellow. Europa, feeling no fear, approaches it. She runs her hand over its smooth, white hide. The bull doesn't flinch. It kneels, an invitation. She's not forced or tricked. She's intrigued. She climbs onto its broad, death-strung back. The bull rises, just as slowly, and begins to walk. It doesn't charge into the waves. It wades in gently, the water parting around its legs. Europa feels the cool spray, but she's not alarmed. The bull is so steady, so calm, that she feels safe, as if she's on a slow-moving boat. She looks back at her friends on the shore, who are watching, mesmerized, as this serene creature carries their friend out across the sea, gliding over the water as if it were a meadow. The whole event unfolds not with a crash, but with the quiet inevitability of a tide coming in. Then there is the story of Leda, the queen of Sparta. She was walking by a river, enjoying the quiet of the afternoon. Suddenly, she hears a rustling in the reeds. a great swan emerges. But again, this isn't a startling appearance. The swan moves with a regal slowness, its long neck curved gracefully. It's being pursued, it seems, by an eagle high above. The swan, appearing distressed, seeks refuge with Lyda. She sees this beautiful, terrified creature and her heart goes out to it. She doesn't question it. She simply opens her arms and gathers the large bird to her, stroking its soft feathers, trying to calm its seemingly fluttering heart. The swan settles into her embrace, its weight comfortable and warm. It rests its head against her shoulder. There's no struggle, no force, just a woman offering comfort to a frightened animal. The sun is warm, the river is murmuring, and the world is peaceful. Lyda sits there holding this elegant swan, feeling a sense of protective calm. The whole encounter is hushed, intimate, a shared moment of quiet by the water's edge. Zeus, in this form, is not a king or a god, but a creature in need of kindness. And what about Dino? Her father had locked her away in a bronze chamber, afraid of a prophecy. She was completely isolated. The room had no doors, only a small opening to the sky. She would spend her days watching the clouds drift by, her only connection to the outside world. One day, she noticed something strange. A single, golden cloud seemed to hover directly overhead. From it, a soft, warm light began to filter down into her room. It wasn't a flash of lightning. It was a slow, steady, golden shower, like liquid sunlight pooling gently on the floor. It was warm and beautiful. Dino wasn't scared. She reached out her hand, letting the golden light trickle through her fingers. It felt like holding a sunbeam. The light filled the cold bronze room with a soft glow, transforming her prison into a sanctuary. In this form, Zeus was not a person, but an atmosphere. He was once light, a silent, beautiful presence that broke through her loneliness without a single word. It's a different way to think about these myths, isn't it? We're so used to the thunder and the drama. But maybe the real magic was in the quiet moments. Maybe Zeus's transformations were a form of meditation, a way for an all-powerful being to experience the world in a simpler, gentler way. To feel the grass as a bull, the water as a swan, the air as a golden mist. He could have become a cuckoo, a small, unassuming bird, to get close to his future wife, Hera. Not a predator, but a tired little bird caught in a storm, seeking shelter. She would have found it, held it to her breast to warm it, and only then would he have revealed himself. A quiet trick, a gentle deception. Or he could have been an ant, a tiny, industrious creature to observe the workings of a human city. Or even a flame, a small, flickering light in a dark cave, just to listen to the stories travelers told around the campfire. Each transformation was a new perspective. As a bull, he knew the feeling of immense, grounded strength. As a swan, he knew the grace of floating on water. As a golden shower, he knew what it was to be weightless, to be light itself. It wasn't just about disguise, it was about experience. He was a cosmic dreamer, trying on different lives like costumes, just to see how they felt. These quiet retellings turned Zeus from a tempestuous king into something more like a wandering artist, or a day. He drifts from one form to another, not with a plan, but with a sense of lazy curiosity. The stories become less about divine power and more about the simple, profound act of becoming, of slowing down, of changing shape, and of seeing the world through different eyes. So next time you see a strange cloud, or a beautiful animal that seems unusually calm, or a sudden, unexplained beam of light, maybe take a moment. Maybe it's just the world being itself. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a god taking a slow, quiet walk just to see what it's like to be something else for a while.